So let's take a look at some of the stories that have been coming down today that we've been covering and the way they're just being twisted. I mean, we have to start with the Mueller investigation because there's a breaking story here. Michael Cohen, who was the kind of tough talking fixer, the guy who said he'd take a bullet for Donald Trump. Apparently he'd take a bullet for Donald Trump, but he ain't going to prison for him. All these guys are like this. These New York tough guys, you know, they're all these little like wheedly guys who sit around and talk like they're gangsters, but they're not gangsters. Even gangsters, they talk tough, but the minute the feds have got them, they roll over. They're all like this. So anyway, he's rolling over and he's talking to Mueller, and now he is talking, telling the story about that he's pleading guilty. He pled guilty in court today to lying about a Trump Tower project that was going to be built in Moscow, but never got built. They were just discussing it. They were talking about it. At one point, Trump signed a letter of intent, which is not binding, just saying, yes, he was thinking of doing this, and they were negotiating with it. And apparently, in closed-door session with Congress, Cohen told them that they had stopped talking about this long before the election began, but they hadn't. That he was talking about it into 2016, and he went and so he pleaded guilty to lying. So here's another one of these witnesses that Mueller has got who is pleading guilty to lying. And you know what they were doing. This is basically doing business, thinking about doing business in Moscow. And we even have, I mean, this is really damning. We have a video of the president encouraging businesses to do business with Moscow. It's very suspicious business. Here's the president encouraging American businesses to do business in Moscow.
Companies represented here today are moving forward with a series of major trade and investment deals that will create jobs for both Americans and Russians across many sectors, from aerospace to automotive engineering to the financial sector and high technology. I am especially pleased that Boeing and Russian technologies are moving forward with a $4 billion deal on 50 Boeing 737s. This is a win for Russia, creating a long-term market for its raw materials and resulting in modern airplanes for Russia's travelers.
That really is damning. The president of the, oh, wait, I'm sorry. That was a different, sorry about that. It was a different president. And this was 2010 when Obama was personally bringing businesses over to Moscow. So doing business with Moscow has only suddenly become this sinister thing. And I have to play, well, let's play Trump's version of this first, because Cohen himself didn't make a statement to the press. But here is Trump being asked about it. And here's what he says about Michael Cohen saying that he lied about when this project was going forward.
So Michael Cohen has made many statements to the House, as I understand it, and the Senate. He put out a statement talking about a project which was essentially, I guess, more or less of an option that we were looking at in Moscow. Everybody knew about it. It was written about in newspapers. It was a well-known project. It was during the early part of 16, and I guess even before that. It lasted a short period of time. I didn't do the project. I decided not to do the project, so I didn't do it. So we're not talking about doing a project. We're talking about not doing a project. Michael Cohen, what he's doing is he was convicted, I guess, you'll have to put it into legal terms, but he was convicted with a fairly long-term sentence on things totally unrelated to the Trump organization, having to do with mortgages and having to do with cheating the IRS, perhaps, a lot of different things. I don't know exactly, but he was convicted of various things unrelated to us. He was given a fairly long jail sentence, and he's a weak person. And by being weak, unlike other people that you watch, he's a weak person, and what he's trying to do is get a reduced sentence. So he's lying about a project that everybody knew about.
Well, it is true. This project was not a secret. I'm not sure whether Trump, I couldn't find anything of Trump saying that it had been turned off earlier than this. But it's another one of these examples. Remember, they were talking earlier in the week. Mueller went before the court and he said that Paul Manafort was lying to him and therefore violating his plea agreement. And he wanted him to get the full sentence instead of the sentence they had agreed to, the reduced sentence they had agreed to. And the press played this like, oh, Manafort is lying. But the lies, it now turns out, according to sources talking to the Wall Street Journal, the lies were alleged misstatements about his personal business dealings and his contacts with a former associate in the Ukraine, and they don't seem to have anything to do with this Trump-Russia collusion. And just to flesh this out a little bit before talking about the way the press has covered this, we got to go to our old friend Adam Schiff, this guy who, I always make fun of the left for calling people Hitler and calling people McCarthy, but Adam Schiff is a genuine Joe McCarthy figure. He has been damning people without producing evidence since this whole thing began, and he does it again here. Everything he says here is simply, it's just not true.
Well, if Mr. Cohen misled the Congress about the president's business dealings in Russia deep into the campaign, it also means that the president misled the country about his business dealings. And that the Russians were apparently attempting to gain financial leverage over the potential president of the United States. This just underscores how important it is for us to finish the investigation, to determine what financial links the Russians have to the president and the Trump organization, to determine whether they continue to hold leverage. So clearly, we have a lot more work to be done. And just as clearly, the president has misled the country about his financial dealings with the Russians.
Well, who says? I mean, just because Michael Cohen lied about something, we don't even know exactly what the lies were, but just because he lied in closed-door sessions about this, why does that mean that Trump lied or that Trump did anything wrong? He was doing business with Russia as a businessman, and he stopped, and as he says, he didn't go through with it. But the problem here for me, and it's a huge problem, is the absolutely supine credulousness with which the press has covered this because they want to destroy Donald Trump so badly. Let's take it from the top. The Russians, as far as we can tell, spent a couple of bucks on Facebook putting out trollish little stories that were kind of in keeping with the other stories that were going back and forth in America. There's no evidence, as Rod Rosenstein himself has said in the Justice Department, there's no evidence that this had any effect on the elections. There's all this idea that they were tampering with our elections, that they did something with the vote that they had an effect. The stuff Max Boot came on the show and talked about. It's just not so. Or if it's so, nobody has indicated it or shown it in any way, shape, or form. So we're talking about something that didn't actually have any effect, just kind of this minor trolling that some Russians have been accused of and will never learn the truth of it because they'll never appear in court, so it'll never be proved. That's the first thing. Secondly, collusion is not a crime. There's no such crime as collusion. So the thing that we're talking about is not even illegal. And yet, this is covered with this po-faced credulousness, this kind of blank stare that it's all fine. Well, nobody is asking, except on the right and mostly really good reporters like Kimberly Strassel, thank you, at the Wall Street Journal is doing a great job, and Molly Hemingway at the Federalist are really covering the fact that this is a disgusting display of machine politics by the Obama administration, where they took this stuff, this misinformation that Hillary Clinton's people had collected from the Russians and gave to the intelligence people, and the intelligence people made sure it got leaked to the press, and the press has covered, followed it. All the stuff that Trump is angry about on this, he's right to be angry about it. This is a setup, and yet, what would it look like? What would it look like if the press covered this honestly, if they covered it from both sides? It would be a different story. And it's just, and now Trump is playing them because they get hysterical every time he says anything that indicates that he thinks that the Mueller investigation is a sham. So recently he told the New York Post, he said he hasn't taken a pardon for Paul Manafort off the table. What he said was, we've never discussed it, but we haven't taken it off the table. Why would I take it off the table? Now stop and think about that statement for a minute. That's a non-statement. That statement means nothing. We haven't discussed it. I haven't taken it off the table. But why would I take it off the table? That's a non-statement. That doesn't mean anything. So let's hear how cable news played this. This is both CNN and MSNBC, how they played that statement and what they think this means.
It sounds like the president is dangling a pardon to Paul Manafort. And at this point in time where Manafort is signed up on Team USA, that's really pretty close to witness tampering.
Joyce, you've already alluded to witness tampering. Is there any cause here to wonder about A, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, which you've mentioned?
In an interview with the New York Post, President Trump dangled the possibility of a pardon for his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, saying, quote, "It was never discussed, but I wouldn't take it off the table." Why would I take it off the table?
And from a legal perspective, this is problematic for him. Yes, the president has very broad pardon power. He could pardon Manafort, but dangling a pardon is something different. It is offering to use your presidential power in order to encourage or entice or influence somebody's behavior. That is a separate act, and that can also be evidence of obstruction.
Gibberish and crap. It's all gibberish and crap. The president has broad pardon powers. He can basically pardon anybody he wants. And he didn't say anything about pardoning anybody. He said it wasn't discussed and we didn't take it off the table. How could he take it off the table if it wasn't discussed? It's absolute nonsense. It goes back to what Sebastian Gorka was talking about earlier this week, that the president has a trick he pulls where he draws these people into speaking nonsense, blithering nonsense on TV, while what he's really doing is something else. What I think he's really doing is he is delegitimizing the Mueller investigation. By the time Mueller releases whatever compilation of innuendo he puts out or compilation of facts he puts out, Trump has already undermined, dug out the ground from underneath him. So it's going to look like bias no matter what he comes up with, unless it's Donald Trump dancing with Putin, under the moonlight. It's going to be really hard for him to make any headway at all, certainly with Trump's base. So, it's just nonsense. If they covered this story honestly, I think Obama and Hillary would look a lot worse than they do. And I think that then maybe if they came up with something on Trump, maybe it would stick.